In the heart of Europe, the bells rang loud. Kings prayed, priests preached, and soldiers sharpened their swords. For them, it was not just a battle, it was a holy mission. A final attempt to stop the rising power from the east. That power had a name: the Ottoman Empire. And at its head stood a man feared across kingdoms, Sultan Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt. The year was 1396. The Ottomans had already swept through the Balkans, capturing Bulgaria and threatening Hungary. Cities fell. Borders shifted. The balance of power was collapsing. Christian Europe watched with dread as Bayezid tightened his grip on the region. He had already surrounded Constantinople. Now his eyes were set further west. In response, Pope Boniface I called for a new crusade, a grand alliance of Christian forces to stop Bayezid's march. Knights from France, Hungary, Germany, Wallachia, and Poland rallied together. It was to be the last great crusade of the medieval era. Their destination, Nicopolis, a fortress town on the Danube River under Ottoman control. The Christian army was massive, shining in armor and pride. Among them were French knights led by John of Nevers, Hungarian forces under King Sigismund, and seasoned warriors from across the continent. It was more than just an army. It was a statement. Europe would not bow to the Ottomans. But Bayezid was no stranger to battle. His army was well-trained, disciplined, and diverse, from Turkish cavalry to elite janissaries, from Balkan auxiliaries to seasoned archers. And unlike the Crusaders, Bayezid's men were unified under one command. He didn't boast. He planned. The Crusaders, confident in their numbers and strength, began their advance through Ottoman-held Bulgaria. They stormed towns and massacred garrisons. At Vidin, they forced the local ruler to surrender. At Orkova, they left nothing behind. Each step was a show of force, and each act a spark of fury for the Ottomans. Bayezid waited patiently. He allowed the Crusaders to move deeper into his land, stretching the supply lines. He was gathering his forces, calculating his moment. Meanwhile, the Crusaders reached Nicopolis and laid siege to the fortress. They expected a quick victory. They were wrong. The siege dragged on. Supplies ran low. Internal disputes began. The French knights wanted glory and refused to follow King Sigismund's cautious strategies. Pride clouded judgment. They underestimated Bayezid, a mistake they would soon regret. Bayezid's army approached silently. Marching through night and dust, they reached Nicopolis on September 24, 1396. The Crusaders were shocked. They had been so sure of victory, now they faced an enemy stronger than expected. But retreat was not an option. The battle was set. At dawn on September 25th, the clash began. The French knights insisted on leading the charge. Against Sigismund's advice, they galloped forward, proud, fearless, and doomed. Bayezid had anticipated this. His light cavalry pretended to retreat, luring the French deeper into a trap. As the knights chased them, they found themselves surrounded. Bayezid's archers fired from the flanks. Janissaries emerged from hidden positions. The terrain worked against the Crusaders. Their horses slowed. Their formation broke. Confusion spread. Death followed. Still, the battle wasn't over. The Hungarian and Wallachian troops tried to regroup. Sigismund rallied his men. But Bayezid unleashed his full army. His elite cavalry smashed into the Christian lines. His infantry advanced in waves. The Crusader army, once proud and united, began to collapse. Sigismund barely escaped with his life, fleeing by boat down the Danube. Thousands of others were not so lucky. Over 10,000 Crusaders died on the battlefield. Many were captured. Among them, high-ranking nobles and knights. Bayezid showed no mercy. It is said that after the battle, Bayezid ordered the execution of thousands of prisoners. Only those who could afford heavy ransoms were spared. The fields of Nicopolis turned red, not just with blood, but with the broken dreams of a crusade that never stood a chance. The news shocked Europe. Kings who had blessed the campaign now remained silent. Mothers wept. Priests whispered of defeat. The myth of Christian military superiority had been shattered. The Ottomans were no longer distant raiders. They were an unstoppable force. But for Bayezid, Nicopolis was more than just a military win. It was a message. The Ottoman Empire would not be intimidated. Europe had come with its finest and failed. The road into the heart of the continent now lay wide open. Bayezid's reputation soared. He became known as the scourge of Christendom, a leader who had outwitted and crushed the combined might of Europe. His empire expanded. He imposed tribute on surviving Balkan states. Even the Byzantine emperor, who once ruled vast lands, now paid taxes to the Ottomans. Still, Bayezid didn't celebrate long. He knew power could be temporary. He tightened control, built new fortresses, and prepared for the next threat. But deep in the east, someone else was watching, a rival not from Europe, but from the steppes of Central Asia. His name was Timur. And while Nicopolis had brought Bayezid glory in the west, Timur would soon challenge him in the east. But that storm was yet to come. The smoke had cleared. The battlefield at Nicopolis was silent. Where once stood a grand army of Christian knights, now only whispers of their fall remained. Sultan Bayezid I, the Thunderbolt, had done what many believed impossible. He crushed the last great crusade of the Middle Ages, but this was not the end. This was only the beginning. Bayezid returned from Nicopolis a hero. Across the Ottoman Empire, mosques echoed with prayers of victory. Soldiers cheered. Cities lit fires in celebration. And in the west, fear took root. No Christian power dared challenge the Ottomans again, not for many years. But Bayezid's mind was already racing ahead. He saw himself not just as a regional sultan, but as a ruler of empires. He believed the Balkans were his Europe, his destiny. And so, his campaigns didn't stop. They multiplied. In the years following Nicopolis, Bayezid expanded his territory deeper into Hungary, Serbia, and Thessaly. He took fortresses, broke alliances, imposed taxes. Many Balkan states had no choice but to become vassals, sending tribute to the Ottoman court in exchange for survival. Bayezid's hunger for power was now unmatched. He even took the Byzantine emperor, Manuel II, and forced him to attend court like a subject. The old Roman legacy that once ruled the world now bowed before a Turkish sultan. But with power came pride. Bayezid began to call himself Sultan of Rum and the East and West. His words were not just royal. They were personal challenges aimed at anyone who might think they stood equal to him, and someone did. Far away, beyond the mountains and deserts, rose a different kind of conqueror. A man whose armies moved like fire, whose mind was as sharp as his sword. His name was Timur, known to history as Tamerlane. Timur had built his empire on the ruins of Mongol states. He had conquered Persia, razed Delhi, defeated Egypt's Mamluks, and even dared to threaten China. Like Bayezid, he believed in destiny. Like Bayezid, he believed he was unmatched. But the world was not big enough for both. Bayezid and Timur had never met. Yet they knew of each other well. Letters were exchanged. Insults hidden in flowery words. Timur accused Bayezid of arrogance. Bayezid mocked Timur's lineage. Both men were powerful. Both men were proud. And both were preparing for war. Bayezid, fresh from his victories in Europe, had little patience for negotiation. He had annexed many Anatolian beyliks, small Turkish principalities that Timur considered under his protection. When their rulers fled to Timur for safety, Bayezid refused to hand them over. Timur, consulted, began moving west. Meanwhile, Bayezid was consumed with ambition. He built fortresses, raised new armies, strengthened his grip over Balkan lands. But he underestimated Timur. He thought the East could wait. He thought Europe was the real prize. That was a mistake. In 1400, Timur's army entered Ottoman lands. Cities that had bowed to Bayezid were now under siege. Bayezid scrambled to respond. He moved his troops across the empire, trying to hold two fronts, east and west, but the pressure was too much. Bayezid finally left the Balkans and turned to face Timur. It was a decision that would change everything. In July 1402, the two titans met at the Battle of Ankara. The outcome was devastating. Bayezid was defeated, his army was scattered, his sons fled, and Bayezid himself was captured by Timur, held as a royal prisoner. The thunderbolt who had once shaken Europe now sat in chains. Some say Timur mocked him. Others say he treated him with respect. What is certain is that Bayezid's pride was broken. He died less than a year later, in March 1403, far from his court, far from his dreams. Back in the Ottoman Empire, chaos followed. With no clear heir, Bayezid's sons fought for power. This period became known as the Ottoman Interregnum, a civil war that lasted over a decade. The empire that once stretched across Europe now risked collapse, and yet the fall was not final. Bayezid's son, Mehmed Çelebi, eventually emerged as victor in the civil war. He restored unity and laid the foundation for an even stronger empire, one that would not only rise again, but go on to conquer Constantinople just decades later. So what did Nicopolis really mean? It was a moment of glory for Bayezid. It proved that the Ottomans were no longer a frontier tribe. They were an empire, ready to challenge the West. It broke the myth of Christian military supremacy and silenced Europe for a generation, but it also became a turning point. The arrogance that followed led Bayezid to make bold decisions, some brilliant, some reckless. His success at Nicopolis led directly to his overreach in Anatolia, and ultimately to his downfall. History remembers Nicopolis not just as a battle, but as a symbol of courage, of pride, of fate. It was the high point of Bayezid's rule and the spark that led to his fall. The grass may have grown over the battlefield, but the story remains. The battle that echoed from the Danube to Damascus, the victory that turned into warning, the crusade that ended in fire. The rise of the Ottomans in Europe didn't end at Nicopolis. It began there. And though Bayezid fell, the empire he built would one day return stronger than ever. Because in history, battles may end, but legacies live on.